Do you struggle with adjusting to different player types? There are so many different types of poker players out there. There's aggressive ones, there's tight ones, there's drunk ones that are there only to have fun. There's really, really good players, there's really, really bad players. So how do you know how to make these adjustments? And that's the difference between a good poker player and a great poker player, is knowing how to make these exploitative adjustments. So I'm Lexy Gavin Mather, professional poker player and coach, and I am gonna teach you how to adjust to different player types. I am putting in a snippet of my course here, the Poker Accelerator, where I have a comprehensive course for the beginner to intermediate type of player. You have to have a basic understanding of how to play, but it is a course for pretty much everyone. It starts a little more beginner and goes into some more advanced concepts. We cover everything from pot odds to check raising to four betting to adjusting to different player types like we're gonna go over today. So before we get into the video, hit that subscribe, check out LexyGavinMather.com. I do have some free training over there. And yeah, let's teach you guys how to adjust to these different player types. So your overall strategy versus all players is you have to be aware of yours and your opponent's physical tells. Now, this is just something that I can't stress enough. It's really, really important to make sure you're paying attention at the poker table. And when you sit down at the poker table, a lot of people just tend to just sit down, just, set up their stack and put their headphones on and just look on their phone and just play their game. But really, one of the first things that I do when I sit down at a poker table is I will take a glance at who each individual person at the table is. I'll look at them in the face, I'll look at their stack, and I start to, base my reads just on their physical appearance alone. And I will watch how they interact when they get their cards. I'll watch how they handle their chips. There's all different things, all different physical tells that a player gives off when they are playing poker. So very first thing is take a glance around the table, look who the big stacks are, look who the short stacks are, look who the older guys are, look who the drunk people are. Just try and get a feel for the overall table, the game flow, and what you can expect when you sit down with these people. Number two is understand that the deck has variance, understand that the deck and variance doesn't play favorites. Sorry, this is not proper English, but basically I'm saying that there's variance in poker. The deck doesn't play favorites, and to just kind of be okay with that and embrace the variance, embrace the swings in poker, because no matter what, there are swings in poker and you just got to deal with it. Again, against all players, be relentless, abuse them until they fight back. Aggression wins in poker, so a strategy of betting and raising is far superior to a strategy of checking and calling. And then finally, be confident, stick to your fundamentals. Don't, try and be a hero. Just, play a solid game, solid foundation. If you are playing at a softer table full of more recreational players, then you can play more of an exploitable strategy where you are making all different kinds of plays and maybe not completely typical plays based just because they are playing so far away from a GTO strategy. If you're playing versus more experienced players, more GTO-based players, then really try and stick to your GTO fundamentals. There's a million courses out there that heavily go into GTO strategy if you're not very confident with it. But yeah, so basically just be confident, stick to your fundamentals, and you will succeed. Okay. So first, let's talk about fishy or inexperienced players. So the majority of people that play poker are, I feel like fishy is a very mean word, and I wish that there was a better word for it. Let's just call them inexperienced recreational players. There's a lot more recreational players than there are pros. I think something like only 2% or maybe less of people in the world that play poker can make a living doing it. And it's not because that 98%, that other 98% studies really hard and tries. No, of course, like the people that are watching this video have a much greater chance of winning in the game. But there's 98% of people, 99% of people that just play for fun and don't want to put in work. So that's going to be the majority of people that you play with, especially if you're playing lower buy-ins, right? Like if you're playing, 50 cent or 25, 50 cent online, or if you're playing, 1-2 live, or if you're playing $100 tournament buy-ins live, like the majority of the field is going to be fishy and inexperienced. So some general rules that I follow when I'm playing versus inexperienced players is I don't bluff versus them too often. Like of course I bluff everybody in poker, but more recreational players have a harder time folding, so your bluffs aren't going to get through as much. So I guess they're just gonna call you down with bottom pair and middle pair on boards that they probably shouldn't, right? Like if you're bluffing if you're triple barrel bluffing on a board where the flush and the straight draw miss and you're holding a blocker and they call you with bottom pair, you're just gonna be like, why did you call? Oh yeah, because they're there to have fun. They don't really love folding that much. So I don't bluff them quite as much. But when I do bluff them, it's going to be the lower part of my linear range. So I am going to widen my linear range versus them, meaning like my best hands. And the worst hands in my linear range are going to be the hands that I am bluffing versus them. So next we have, you want to widen your calling range. So I feel like a lot of recreational players like to either over bluff and overvalue worse bad hands, right? Marginal hands. So for example, if they have ace-7 on a king-high board, if it's like king-7 deuce, 3 deuce, I feel like they're gonna like way overvalue a hand like ace-7. So really you can widen your calling range versus them, because they're gonna think they're betting for value and really they're just value owning themselves, right? So widen your calling range versus them, and don't bluff versus them as much. So now I have bet big when you have it. Don't worry about balance. Now, I don't want you to be the type of player that bets small when they don't have it, bets really big when they have it. That's really, really exploitable as a general rule. But if you know your opponent isn't paying attention to your bet sizing, or if they, again, are just a player that is going to call you with middle pair no matter what, then when you have a hand that you want to get value with, bet big. Like, they don't understand the concept of not getting the correct odds to call with certain parts of their range. So typically when I know that I'm up against a fishier player, I will bet big, and usually they will pay me off. I said don't worry about balance because, like I said, they're not paying attention as much to what you're doing. So they're not gonna pick up on your bet sizing patterns. They're just overall not gonna be paying as much attention if they're fishier and more inexperienced. Okay, so next I have their physical tells are obvious. Yes, they are obvious. It's actually remarkable how some, really, really bad players will very obviously, they'll just get really excited when they look down at their cards and they see that they have a good hand. They'll start cutting out bets in their chip stack. They'll basically, some players will actually grab chips and hold it in their hand before the action is on them because they know that they're going to put in chips. So I think it's pretty easy to figure out which players are doing it as a reverse tell, meaning which players are doing this to kind of throw you off, knowing that you're paying attention to their tells. But I think most players that are on the recreational side don't, they just get really excited and like to handle their chips prematurely. So yeah, be aware of their physical tells because they are more obvious than a more experienced player. And then be aware of their bet sizing tells. Recreational players, fishier players have such obvious bet sizing tells. They'll bet big, big, big when they have it, or they'll bet really, really small when they don't have it. No, like try and pick up on these patterns and then figure out ways to exploit them, right? Like if you notice that your opponent is always betting small and, you know, just trying to put in a little bit of money into the pot just to try and take down the pot because they're uncomfortable with their hand, well, then you should be raising them a lot. If you notice that they're betting really big, then you probably shouldn't hero call them as much, right? You know, other players will reverse it. They'll bet really big when they are bluffing, and they'll bet smaller when they have a value hand because they want to get called. So just try and figure out, you know, and the best way to figure this out is just to kind of watch what they've been doing. And I think it's pretty easy to pick up what their patterns are. Most fishier players, they don't like switch it mid-session. Like they don't switch their bet size strategy mid-session, right? Like I don't think that they're going to be like, oh, I think they're picking up on the fact that I'm always betting big when I have it and small when I don't. And let's reverse it. Like it happens, of course, but I feel like for the majority of players, they're just going to, it's pretty obvious to figure out what they're doing. So now let's talk about tight players. So tight players are players that don't play a lot of hands. They typically have it when they are entering a pot. They have something strong. So against tight players, I have a few different strategies. You want to, if you've raised pre-flop and they called, you want to increase your continuation bet frequency because they'll fold all flops that they brick. So you can just take it down with a lot of c-bets, right? And if they call you on the flop, then you can check back a lot of turns. So you can c-bet versus them more. You want to avoid 3-betting them light versus their open. So if they're opening and they're really tight, then you probably shouldn't 3-bet too polarized versus them. You want to have more of a value-heavy 3-betting range versus tight players because they're just going to have a lot of hands that they can call you with or 4-bet you with. And if they do end up 4-betting you and you are on the bottom portion of your 3-betting range, then you should just be overfolding. And now for post-flop, you want to proceed with caution post-flop. So if they show strength, then you should pot control more. So if you flop top pair versus them, top pair like middle kicker, say you have like queen 10 on a 10-6-4 type flop, like you don't want to go too crazy versus their c-bets. I would just play more of a pot control strategy versus them and do more calling rather than raising. And definitely if you do find yourself in situations where you are putting in a raise post flop and they come over the top and you have like a semi bluff or something, then I'd probably do more folding. So now if you have a premium hand versus them, you want to 3-bet them with a bigger sizing. So if a tight player opens and you have a really good hand, then you can usually you can size up a little bit because chances are they are going to have something that they can call you with. The deeper stacked you are, the bigger I suggest going. So if they raise to 3 or 4 times the big blind, then I would usually go like 4 times their bet, something like that, as opposed to like a standard 3. And you don't want to call them down too lightly. Again, when they're betting post-flop, they're going to have it. So I wouldn't make too many hero calls versus them. Less, hero calls with ace highs and bottom pairs, under pairs, things like that. Basically just overfold to tight player aggression. So now let's talk about loose aggressive players. So versus loose aggressive players, and loose aggressive players are players that play a lot of hands. They put in a lot of light 3-bets. They'll have a polarized 4-betting range, and they'll bluff a lot, and they'll just try and put the pressure on you to fold your hand. So versus aggressive players, you want to proceed with caution and be aware of check raises and 4-bets. Now, aggressive players will definitely check raise hands with backdoor equity, and they'll check raise a lot of their draws. So on boards that is very draw heavy, say you have a middle pair or top pair on a draw heavy board, and you were the initial opener and an aggressive player called from the blinds or something, I would check back a lot of my top pairs and things like that to pot control, because you are more likely to get check raise on wet connected textures, especially versus aggressive players. So I would, play a little bit trappier versus them. You can 3-bet them wider pre-flop because they are going to have a wider opening range, so they are going to have to fold their bad hands to 3-bets. Aggressive players also tend to not love folding, so if you are going to 3-bet them wider pre-flop, then you should be prepared to follow up with the aggression post-flop, because at the end of the day, we're all dealt the same 2 cards, right? Like, an aggressive player can, of course, put pressure on you and, raise your C bets and things like that. But at the end of the day, like, they have to have something. Like, so if you fight back with aggression, then they are going to have to, then they're just going to have to, make a lot of folds, right? Because they're calling wide preflop. So 3-bet them wider preflop. Bluff catch more versus them, so they are going to bluff a lot more, so you can, call them wider. I have widen your value call range. It's kind of the same thing. You can make some more hero calls with them, with ace highs versus them. You're going to call, on boards where there's a lot of draws that brick, straight draws, flush draws, and especially if you're not holding any of the straight or flush blocker, like if you don't have straight or flush blocker, then you can call them wider. Like, you can call them with some ace highs and some bottom pairs and things like that, because I think that aggressive loose players are going to bluff their brick draws a lot more than like a tight player. You want to have a balanced 4-bet range, so they are going to be 3-betting you pretty wide pre-flop, so you have to be prepared to 4-bet them with some, it doesn't have to be a premium hand, but a good candidate for 4-bets would be hands with blockers to their snap calls, so hands like ace-9, hands that are they're too weak to flat, but have blockers, they block their 3-betting range, so hands like ace-9, ace-10, king-9, king-8, things like that. You don't want to let someone just relentlessly 3-bet you, right? Like, they shouldn't be able to get away with that. And hands like ace-9, they don't play well as a flat, so that's why I like to put it into my 4-betting range. And then if they 5-bet shove or something, then you just fold. But you kind of put them in their place early and let them know that it is not okay and that you are not going to let them get away with that. So now I have, in yellow here, be willing to play for stacks more. So I think loose aggressive players are going to have a 4-bet and 5-bet shoving range. And so I think you have to kind of widen up your pre-flop calling range versus them. And I don't mean like, hands like 9-8 suited, like, no, you shouldn't get that in pre-flop versus them, but maybe a hand like pocket 8s, like if they're loose and crazy and spastic and are willing to get it in with pocket 6s or something, then I'd say, make a light call with pocket 8s or something. I'm saying if they 3-bet you, if you open if they open, you call. Sorry, if they open, you 3-bet with a hand like pocket 9s or something, or pocket 10s, they 4-bet you, then you should be 5-bet shoving there for value sometimes. Especially versus aggressive players that are on the weaker side, because loose aggressive players that are fishier tend to overvalue hands like pocket 7s more than they should, and things like that. So now we have use larger preflop sizes. Now, and going back to the slide before where we talked about tight players, and I said, you should adjust your bet sizes based on how they play. I typically wouldn't suggest adjusting your pre-flop sizes versus good players, but versus more crazy aggressive players that are weaker. I think that, like I said, with the more recreational players, they're not going to pay attention to your sizing as much. So you can kind of adjust your strategy, adjust your size, because they're just going to call you a lot more and probably not pay too much attention to that sizings. So, yep, some things to keep in mind versus loose aggressive players. Okay, so now let's talk about how to play versus good players or professional poker players. So you definitely want to keep them on their toes. They are paying attention to everything that you're doing. They are watching how you react. They're watching your tells. They're watching your bet sizing. They're watching everything. So keep them on their toes. Mix in some funky plays. Don't, play the same type of, you can't really play ABC versus them. You have to get fancy and make some interesting plays. So now you also want to bluff catch them more. So you are going to make some lighter hero calls. They are going to be, they're going to bluff a lot. They're going to know good spots to put the pressure on. So you can't be so passive and just give up on your bottom pairs very often. Like if the flop is king 7 deuce and you have a hand like 7-8 and they bet flop, they c-bet flop, right? They're going to be c-betting this flop with a large portion of their range, right? King 7 deuce, like they should be c-betting all of their error and their value hands, right? If the turn is an overcard and they bet again, then you shouldn't just give up so often versus them, right? Like they are going to understand that they are going to be, they should be c-betting at 50 or 60% of the time and then follow through on a lot of turns, especially if they choose a small sizing on the flop. So if they're betting small on the flop, then you should understand that they're going to be following through on a lot of turns, because when they bet small on the flop, say they bet 25% pot on the flop, then they're going to be aware that you're going to have a lot of floats on a board like that, right? So you are going to have some ace highs and bottom pairs and under pairs and things like that that you're going to be calling a 25% pot bet. So that's why they're going to continue to barrel the turn a lot, because they know that they gave you a good price on the flop, so therefore they're going to follow through with a lot of their bluffs on the turn. So basically what I'm saying is don't give up so easily. You're going to bluff catch them more. Again, going back to the boards where draws bricked, especially if you're not holding any of the blockers to the draws, you should be calling them wider. If the draws did get there, say a flush draw got there and you have the ace of hearts, and they bet really big on the river or something, like if they go bet flop, bet turn, and bet river, you can bluff raise them some of the time with the nut flush blocker, because they're going to have some bluffs on completed draw boards, right? So don't be afraid to bluff catch them more, and you can also bluff raise them too. You want to trap more, so on boards where you have the nuts or top sets or things like that, you can play a trappier style versus them because they are going to bluff so much. You can also, you have to be aware of your image when you're playing versus good players, because if you have a really nitty image, and then you flop middle or top set or something and they c-bet and you raise them, they're gonna make a lot of folds, because your overall style is you're not bluff raising them very much, and you have kind of a tighter image. If you have a crazy image, they're going to pick up on that, and then therefore you can raise more with your nutted hands, because you're just going to they're not going to give you as much credit, right? So try and figure out, I said be aware of your physical tells, be aware of your overall tells, your patterns, because like I said, they are going to pick up on this and you can use it against them, right? If, you can use reverse tells versus good players, so, mix it up on them. If, you're the type of player that gets excited when you have a good hand, try and, you can be excited when you have a good hand, but then also try and be a stone and act like you're not gonna play the hand when you have a good hand, and this way they will pay you off more. So be aware of your physical tells, use reverse tells on them, and just be aware of the type of player that they think that you are, and then figure out how to make adjustments to that. Like I said, if they think that you're more of a tight player, then you can be bluffing more versus them. If they think that you're a crazy player, then you should trap more, and just kind of, you should play tighter if they think you're crazier. So just always, always, always make adjustments to your opponent. Okay. Keep your range as balanced as possible. Be more polarized. So you are going to have a polarized 3-betting range versus them and a 4-betting range versus them. They are going to 3-bet you a lot, so therefore you need to put in some light 4-bets, like we were talking about with aggressive players. You want to also have a 3-betting range from the big blind. Now, people don't have a 3-betting range that much from the big blind because they're getting a better price to call. They close the action. I feel like the majority of people just flat, like way too much from the big blind when you should be mixing in some raises, right? Like if they know that you're always calling from the big blind and never 3-betting, then they're gonna over open on your big blind. Like if they don't have to worry about you about getting 3-bet off their hand, then they're just gonna open more versus you in the big blind because you're just exploitable, and they know that likely you're either gonna fold or just call and not 3-bet from the big blind as much. So I like to 3-bet hands like ace-3 off, like if a good pro is in the cutoff or something, and you are in the big blind with a hand like ace-3 off or king-9 off or things like that, then put in some 3-bets and don't be so exploitable. So keep your bet sizes the same. I mentioned this earlier. You can adjust your bet sizes in a heads-up pot versus bad players or players that are more likely to pay you off because they're not going to pay as much attention to your bet sizing. But good players, like I said, they're paying attention to everything. So I would make my bet sizes as unexploitable as possible and keep everything pretty uniform and the same. Again, I said don't be exploitable. You can check more versus good players. So say it's a heads-up pot. I think I actually have an example here. Yeah, so say you have pocket tens and there's a king on the board. Overall, like when it comes to continuation betting, I'll c-bet more versus bad players, and I'll check more versus good players. And the reason I want to check more versus good players is because, again, you want to be unexploitable. So if you c-bet pocket tens on a king high board and they raise you, then you're just like in an uncomfortable situation, whereas if you check the flop and they bet, then you can comfortably call and kind of play more of like a pot control trappy type strategy. All right, now let's talk about how to play versus calling stations. Okay, so calling stations are just people that call. They don't have much of an aggressive strategy. They just they're sticky. Calling is another word for sticky. And they just like to see a lot of flops and just play a lot of hands. So how to adjust versus calling stations is, number one, you want to widen your linear 3-bet or your value-heavy 3-betting range. You don't want to 3-bet them too lightly because they're just going to call you so much. Like you can 3-bet them with your value hands, but widen the number of value hands that you have in your range from, say, maybe you're not 3-betting a hand like pocket 8s for value. Maybe you will 3-bet a calling station with pocket 8s in position for value because they're going to call you with junky hands like jack 8, right? Or jack 7 suited. So widen your linear 3-betting range. If you are going to 3-bet them light, which, I'm not saying never 3-bet a calling station light because they are going to call really wide pre-flop and then they're going to fold a lot of flops. So you can 3-bet them widely pre-flop, but you have to continue the post-flop aggression, right? You're going to have to take it down. You're going to have to continuation bet a lot. You're going to have to bet a lot of turns if they call. And, you'll have to pull some triple barrel bluffs on them if you are going to 3-bet them light. So Number 2, I wrote avoid light 3 bets. We just talked about that. Number 3, excuse me, increase your c-bet frequency. So say you open and they call. Like I said, they're going to have brick the flop a lot because they are calling so wide pre-flop that you are just going to be able to take it down with a lot of c-bets. And number 4 is you want to increase your bet size. So you do want, if you are c-betting as a bluff, then you can increase your bet sizing because, and again, this is versus more, weaker. When I say calling stations, I kind of assume that all calling stations are more on the recreational side. So that's why I'm saying you can increase your bet size versus them when you're bluffing because they are like, you want that extra fold equity. And I feel like you have to choose a bigger bet sizing to accomplish that, right? Because calling stations are going to call small bets a lot too, right? Small C bets. So if you have error, then increase your bet sizing. If you have a value hand, then you can kind of stick to the same type of bet sizing so that they do call you, they do call you wide post flop. Like I said, they are going to brick a lot of flops. So if you have a value hand, then you want to go a little bit smaller just so that they do call you with like ace highs and under pairs and things like that. Okay, so now let's talk about how to adjust to players that are just there to have fun and drunk players. So when you're playing in a casino atmosphere, you are going to encounter drunk people. It's okay. Like everyone, people like to go get, have some cocktails and, go sit at a table and play some poker. And it's totally cool. I love playing versus people that are just there to have fun. So some ways to adjust to this is, first of all, drunk people that are just there to have fun, people that are on vacation and only get to play a couple times a year, they are typically going to play crazier, right? So you have to kind of be willing to, get it in a little bit wider versus them, obviously your value range. Get it in a little bit wider versus them because they are going to overvalue, small pairs and things like that. You want to widen your value 3-bet range because they'll call you light. So I wouldn't like 3-bet them too lightly pre-flop, but you can widen your value heavier linear 3-betting range because they're going to call you with a lot worse. You can continuation bet more versus them, especially when you have a value hand. Again, you can kind of adjust your bet sizes. If you have it, you can kind of bet more. And I wrote, put them to the test with 4 bets. So if they're 3-betting you and they're just kind of, throwing out chips and not really paying attention, then put them to the test with some 4 bets. Also, again, make more hero calls versus them. They are going to bluff a lot. They're going to overvalue hands. They're not going to really, be paying too much attention to what hands beat them and things like that. So you can hero call versus them more. And again, use larger bet sizes when you have it because they're not paying attention. Now, I know, again, you're not supposed to make adjustments to your sizes overall. Like, this is not something I am trying to teach you. This is not part of your GTO strategy. Again, versus good players, versus unknown players, people that you haven't played with. Stick to the same bet sizes. I'm only saying adjust your sizes if you know for sure that your opponents aren't paying attention to you. And yeah. So now let's talk about how to play versus tournament players. So you want to be aware of the players that really just want to cash. So for example, when you're on the bubble, if you notice that the players are really, really tight, then you can abuse the bubble, raise a lot of hands because they're just going to overfold on the bubble. Like, some players just really, really want to cash. Be aware of players that aren't afraid to rebuy. So in a re-entry tournament, the people that are, are only there with one buy-in, have saved up all year for this and are, just really excited to play this, they're going to overfold to you. You can bluff them more. They're going to be scared to put in their chips. But the players that are just, kind of blasting and have a bankroll and aren't afraid to gamble, just be aware of those players. You can, you know, you can just kind of get it in wider versus them. If you're going to have to call versus them wider, like if they're shoving and you have a hand like pocket tens and you know that they have like multiple bullets in their pocket, especially like, of course, during the rebuy period, you want to, and as you're approaching the end of the rebuy period, if you know that your opponent is, you know, on the shorter side and you know that they want to just kind of bust so that they can have starting stack again when they rebuy, you'll have to make wider calls versus them pre-flop and post-flop. And then you want to be aware of the players that constantly look at the pay jumps. Sorry, typo here. This is supposed to say the pay jumps. People tend to sweat small pay jumps way too much. Like, in a lot of situations, ICM doesn't really come into play until the pay jumps get pretty significant. So when you're playing at a table with people that are like sweating out every single pay jump, you know, people will overfold when they're on the direct bubble of a pay jump. You can abuse those players more and kind of exploit them more. And finally, let's talk about how to play versus your friends and family. Now, everyone, you know, you're sometimes going to end up at tables with your friends and your family. I, you know, play with my fiance all the time. I always had a saying, I would check raise my grandmother. There are no friends at the poker table, especially when you're in a poker tournament, right? Like only one player can win the poker tournament. So you know, have to kind of treat them as just any other player. Don't go easy on them. First of all, if you soft play your friends, like it's borderline cheating. So I wouldn't recommend that. Definitely don't ever check the nuts down to your friend. Just treat your opponent, you know, treat your friend, your family member as an opponent and kind of, you know, if it helps, tell them beforehand that you're going to just play your normal game versus them, you know, and just, you know, just let them know that beforehand so that they don't get upset with you if you win a pot off them. Like I said, make an agreement beforehand that you're playing versus each other or find a different table. If you're playing in a cash game, then you don't have to sit at the same table. Like if you are feeling uncomfortable that your brother is in the game or your significant other is in the game and you want to soft play them, well, then just sit at a different table. Because at the end of the day, like, you can't avoid any one player at the table. Like, no matter what, like situations happen where you're just going to end up in a pot together and you shouldn't go easy on them. Again, check raise your grandmother. Of course, I mean, this goes without saying, no signals, no colluding. Obviously, don't be that player. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Hit the subscribe. Check out LexyGavinMather.com to sign up for the course or to check out some free training at LexyGavinMather.com as well. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.